Hey guys, welcome to Games and Gardens. Today it's
Gardens. So some of my friends have asked me what I use for a mulch in my garden, and I can simply answer that with a comment, but that's a loaded question for me because the reason I mulch at all has to go back a few years. So 4 years ago, in 2015, we bought this house, and the backyard was empty. There was only a shed, and that was it. So it was a blank canvas. We could do whatever we wanted with it, and I knew right away I wanted to build a garden. So over the course of a year or two, we had these 4 10 by 10 areas that were dedicated to crop rotation, and I used cinder block to border each area, and it kind of looked like the middle was like a big plus sign. And I thought, okay, I got to get a rototiller, I got to break it up every single year, and I got to rotate my crops every single season, so that way the diseases don't go from one to the other, etc., etc. And I was using conventional farming methods. Well, we realized very quickly that our soil was terrible. I mean, it was sand. You basically had sand. You would just put water on top of the dirt and it would just pool. It wouldn't absorb whatsoever, and it was extremely hard to grow anything because I was working. I couldn't have a garden essentially because I'd have to be out there watering it 3 times a day, 4 times a day. It was so dry. So I thought, okay, well, it needs manure or compost. Okay, so then I would just put that on top thinking, okay, no big deal. But then the weeds would come in, and then when the weeds came in, forget about it, because once the weeds came in, I couldn't do anything. It became too much work, watering, weeding, day in, day out. And then over time, we had another child. I was pregnant one summer. That was a terrible hot summer. And then I had a newborn the following year, so it was really hard to go out in the garden and toil away, and we would get meager produce compared to the work that was put into it. So I did a little research, and I tried to look for other farming methods that were more sustainable, for lack of a better word. And I found this one video. It was in 2011 that it was published by 2 women from college, and it was about a man named Paul Gauchi who lives in Sikkim, Washington, known as sunny Sikkim. They only get about 14 inches of rain a year, so don't think that they get plenty of rain, that this is totally doable just in that area. But what he does is he looked to nature, and he sought God, and he said the same thing that I was at the point of saying at that point in my life 2 years ago. I was saying, God, why is this so hard? And then I feel like he showed me that video, because the video answered all of my questions and more. So you see, Paul Gauchi was asking the same questions to God, and God said, go in the forest at the edges of your lawn, at the edges of your land, and see what I do in nature. So he would pull back the covering in the forest, and he noticed that it was moist. It wasn't dry. And once again, that's 14 inches of rain a year, and it's still moist underneath, enough to keep the wild trees and shrubs and things alive for the whole season. And he thought, what am I doing wrong? So he took what nature does, he emulated nature, and he put it in his garden. And that's where my covering comes into play. So you might see that and say, okay, no big deal, just a bunch of mulch. What do I just get that at the store, go to Home Depot? No, do not go to Home Depot. Do not go to a local landscaping or garden center. Go to a local tree service and ask them for chipped wood. And not just any chipped wood. Ask them to get the raw stuff. You don't want anything done to this wood. You just want it chipped up, branches, leaves and all. The leaves, the more the better. And you just dump it on top of your garden. You basically are creating a covering. Think about all those weeds that I talked to you about. Remember all those weeds that I said I was overcome by and I just couldn't deal with anymore? Well, the reason those weeds are there is because the soil's been tilled. The soil's been exposed. And people have been doing this for hundreds, thousands of years, and they don't think anything of it because, hey, it's tradition. But I thought of it, and I said, this isn't right. My soil gets worse every year. I have to put stuff in it every year, and it's costing me more money than it's worth, and the labor is ridiculous. So, let me show you what I'm talking about when I say I have a mulch covering. This is just all absorbed from over time with the rains. So that's essentially what this method of gardening is. I highly recommend, if those of you who are struggling like me, why every year I toil and till the garden just for it to give me a meager response, look into the Back to Eating documentary. And it's free, it's on YouTube. It's about an hour and some change, but it is so worth it. Watching the way Paul Gauci has used his method for over 30 years and seeing the fruits of his labor. Hold on, airplane. There we go. So I highly recommend you watch the documentary that I saw. It was a life-changing decision of mine and my family to change our gardening methods, to put a covering on, because it makes all the difference in the world. You put a covering on top of the plants that you've already have established, and you no longer need to water them. You no longer will have to till. There's no weeding. What? There's no weeding involved? Why? Well, because weeds need a soil. They need to be the covering if it's not there already, and they can't germinate in this medium because even though it will break down over time and become rich, awesome soil, it's not there yet on top. So on the surface, it provides the covering that nature does out in the wild, especially in the fall. Think about when all the leaves fall down. Think about the pine needles that fall down in the fall. Nature does that in the fall. Well, when do we do it? In the spring. So we got it all backwards sometimes, and we need to step back and think, all right, I need to follow what God's been doing all this time, and I need to step out in faith and work with Him and do it together. And it's a symbiotic relationship. This is our first year doing the Back to Eden Garden, and although I have had my trials, believe me, it's not perfect, but I've never had to water. Rarely have to weed. As a matter of fact, I will show you what it's like to weed right now. And that's weeding in my garden for my burrow. And it turned out that a neighbor didn't like that the wood chips were on our driveway because they thought it was a fire hazard. So we had to go to court, and then they were like, okay, we'll just get rid of it and then come back. So then we had to get all that mulch in a very short amount of time in our yard and then go back to court just for them to dismiss the case. So just be careful about the mulch and where you put it in your yard, because I live in a small borough. It's 2 square miles, but they're very strict on a lot of things, at least in my street. There's maybe if you have a good relationship with your neighbors, just tell them, hey, I'm doing this because of XYZ. So that way they don't think you're a total crazy person. Other than that, when the time comes to plant, you're going... Another plane. Okay, now say you have your covering, say you have wood chips, or you have leaves, or anything that's a covering that will turn into the soil and make it richer is a covering. It doesn't always have to be wood chips. You can use leaves, you can use rocks, something that will cover the ground, will aerate the soil in a way, bring those earthworms up, and eventually rot and turn into soil over time. They are all great ideas for coverings. So let's say you do have your covering, or you have a hookup, and you know what you're doing. You're planning this already. Okay, what's next now that I got this all planned out? So what you're going to do is you're not just going to stick a bunch of mulch and just put it on top of a bed. You're going to want to layer it, because you want to choke out any weeds or any grass that may be existing on your soil at that time. So with us, we had a lot of my garden, when we put everything in, it was pretty much all gone to weed. So what we did, we took newspaper and layered about 3 or 4 layers deep of newspaper and laid it all out, wet it, so that way if a wind or breeze catches it, it won't be flying away and you're not like crazy trying to chase newspapers down the road. Don't ask me how I know that. And once you get the newspaper down, then you can either, if you have manure, put that on top, or compost, or just the straight up wood chips. And do it deep. Do it about 6 inches, especially around trees. If you're going to do it around trees, do it maybe even more, like 8 inches. Because eventually that will break down, especially if you're doing this in the fall. If you're doing this in the fall, you're going to come back in the spring and a good portion of those wood chips will already be broken down over the winter. Then once you have all this covering done and the fall's here, you can rest assured and just say, okay, it's finished. Go back into your house, get some good seed catalogs ordered, so in January you can plan your garden out. That was my favorite part of this year, was getting like 4 or 5 different seed catalogs every week and just mapping out where I'm going to put everything, what I'm going to do with it all. I had some really cool places that I never heard of. Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds, awesome place to get some seeds that are really unique, just like those noodle beans that you guys have seen. The 8-ball squash, the ones that are like a little ball, yeah, that I got from Baker Creek too. Another great place would be M.I. Gardner. They have 99-cent seed packets, and don't think you get like 1-2 seeds. You get like 25 seeds in each packet, and that's plenty, especially if you're a seed saver like I am. Now the difficult part comes. Winter is past, spring is coming. I've got some of my starts all ready to go. I want to transplant, I want to direct sow. How do I do that if I can't germinate in the medium? Well, let me show you. So first step is find a place in your garden that you want to put this particular seed. Put some thought into it, because depending on what you grow, it's going to take up a bit of room. With these seeds particularly, they are going to be squash giant monsters. First step is you peel back your layer. You will need some water for this. You want to get to the dirt. You don't want to do it in the wood chips. Put your seed in, and then cover it up with some soil. You don't need a whole lot of soil to cover it. And then water it. And that's it. Now let me show you some stuff I've already put in the ground and done the same thing about 2 weeks ago with. These are cucumber. You see some of them are already starting to flower. And you just peel back the layer. As you could tell, I peeled back the wood chips, exposed the soil, put the seeds in the ground, did the same exact thing. I watered them, and look at them, they're taking off. Now it's at this stage that you can safely cover them with the mulch. Once they're tall enough that they can be covered by the mulch and not be bothered by it, that's when you can put the mulch back. You don't have to water anymore. It's great. Now transplants, I think, are even easier in the Back to Eden garden method, because you just peel back the layer, you get to the dirt, put the transplant in, cover it up, water it, set it and forget it, and you're done. That's what I think I like most than anything. It's really hard, I think, to get used to the whole putting the mulch back, watering every time, especially when you're so used to not watering anymore. It gets pretty cumbersome, and I sound so spoiled saying that, because I remember last year I would water 3 times a day. And now, I barely water at all. I only water when I'm putting new starts in. That's it. It's great. Guys, I hope this video was really encouraging. I hope it was informative. I hope to see some of you guys try this out in any way that you can. Even if it's something small, it doesn't have to be as big as I have. Start small. Do just a small area of your garden. Slowly make it an entire backyard if you want. I don't care. I just want to see that some of you guys have been inspired by this video, encouraged to try this as well, and I want to see some progress. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Have a blessed day. Peace out.